But
Okay, cool.
uh, hello, welcome to a new podcast, a new era, I guess. Marshall and I haven't gone away, but I wanted to bring my friend Jackson Danner into the fold. This is our new podcast we call Hardware, where we talk about college football awards races, particularly the Heisman, but we'll throw in like the other awards, their histories, certain winners and finalists that we want to talk about. We'll throw those in from time to time, but this week we're going to start talking about the 2012 Heisman race, which is kind of like a lost and forgotten Heisman race. It's like anticlimactic, and to be honest, in my opinion, it wasn't that exciting. So, Jackson, do you care to give some background upon yourself for everyone?
Yeah, so there was basically, spoiler alert, Johnny Manziel won the race. He was the first freshman to ever win it. Tim Tebow 5 years before was the first sophomore true underclassman to win it. Basically, it went down. There was a quarterback out of Kansas State, Colin Klein, who went and, obviously didn't end up winning it. But it really came down to Manti Te'o, that linebacker from Notre Dame, as well as Johnny Manziel, who obviously ended up winning it. It was the closest Heisman race in history. It came down to one vote. So I think the previous was, 28 votes. I can't remember which race it was, but it was a tight race. You have two, basically it was history no matter how you looked at it. K-State had never had a Heisman winner before. You had Johnny Manziel, Johnny Football, who was a freshman, and as we talked about, that had never happened before. And then anytime a defensive player, even the defensive players that had won it before, they got the ball and special teams, played a little offense, something like that. You think of Desmond Howard and Charles Woodson and all those, but Manti Te'o really tackles and interceptions. I think he had 100 tackles and 7 interceptions, like the first in 5 years to do it when he did it in 2012. You can ask his girlfriend about that. So, yeah, basically came down to just one vote, and Johnny Manziel ended up winning it. So.
Yeah, so I want to talk about first Colin Klein. He's sort of like
Colin, I think I said Calvin. I was like, I was like, that's not right. It sounds familiar, but not right. Yeah, Colin.
But yeah, easily confused for that reason. People forget about Colin Klein. I think that shows like this like vortex of like great Kansas State quarterbacks like disappear. And I'm not talking about Josh Freeman, but like quarterbacks are like Heisman worthy, like Michael Bishop in the late 90s on those great Bill Snyder teams. He was a finalist. Never really did much in the pros. I think he was the last quarterback the Patriots drafted before they drafted Tom Brady. Also, to show you how old Tom Brady is, like Michael Bishop was a finalist, I think, in '98. I'll have to fact check, but I mean, he was on a Kansas State team that almost went to the BCS title game. And then you look at Al Roberson, didn't get votes, but on that great Kansas State team with Darren Sproles, he sort of faded into oblivion. And then now Colin Klein, who had the great year in 2012, national title contenders until they faced Baylor. And that's sort of like a trend with the Big 12 in like 2012, 2013, where it sort of like cannibalized itself, where you had like teams choking. I think the following year it was Baylor that choked in the late season, ruining their chance at the BCS title game. So that was sort of a trend to see. But do you think, I guess like based off like, first question I should ask is like, do you think that Colin Klein could have won it if Kansas State ran the table?
So if they had run the table, they ended up going to the Fiesta Bowl, right? So I think there's a couple of things with that. I think that the Big 12 of the Power 5 conferences, especially back then, like you talked about, was they cannibalized each other. So, with Colin, I don't think he could have won it just because the spotlight was never really on the Big 12, like truly. SEC had won. They started with 2006 with Florida through the 2011 season. I think it was Alabama that won it. They had that streak, so everything was really on the SEC at that point. So I don't think you could ever truly have the spotlight on Colin Klein. And I keep using the word spotlight because think of how the Heisman is voted, right? It's voted on by like hundreds of, I think it's media members really. And so what does the media do? They hype up what is the most entertaining, the most important. So it's like, I don't think that's why I think it's been so long since like a group of 5, player won it and really truly competed for it. And I know they went to a BCS bowl game and all of that, but I never felt like it was really there. Where like, man, like if you're just hanging out at the water cooler, like, man, tomorrow night, like we gotta watch the Big 12 game that's coming on at night. It just was never that. And I think that that's something that's really, really important. And I think that shows, like the top two finalists, Johnny Manziel, who, was for a Texas A&M team that had a lot of success in the SEC West, which let's be honest, that was the SEC West back then. And Manti Te'o from an independent Notre Dame team who I don't know if you can really say competed for a national championship, but they participated in the national championship.
Yeah.
So, that's my opinion of why I don't think Colin could have won it.
So I think, on that point, an interesting thing to note is 2012. Like, I'll bring some TV contract perspective into it. This was like the the first year that Big 12 had their primetime games broadcasted on Fox. They had the Fox primetime game. So early on in that, Fox doesn't really have like the reputation it has now. So it's competing oftentimes with with Saturday Night Football and ABC. And in concordance with that, Kansas State, they were number 2 in the AP and I believe the BCS when they lost to Baylor. So, they were bound for the national title. And I remember, I think it was like the week after they lost to Baylor, the week that they lost to Baylor, either the week or the week after, Notre Dame played Boston College in their first game. It was like their highest BCS rankings the week after that. But I just think they're like Colin Klein's signature win against Oklahoma, where he had 149 signature win. Oklahoma ranked number 6 at the time in the AP early in the season. He only had 149 passing yards and 79 rushing yards and a touchdown. Not too impressive, but he was a workhorse for sure. Like 920 rushing yards and 23 touchdowns after by season's end. Only had 3 100-yard games. So he was like sort of the heart and soul of that team, but it wasn't really like a really glamorous team. And I say this as, my family, my parents, they served at Fort Riley. My mom took classes at K-State when she was enlisted. So I grew up having an eye on Kansas State. But nothing about those Bill Snyder teams, until he retired, said anything really glamorous. The style of play for sure.
Right.
And I think Colin Klein was just a cover boy of that. And, like it or not, fans, they're attracted to certain styles of play. And as much as I hate to say it, it's true, I guess, in the case of Colin Klein.
Right. No, I totally agree with everything you said there. It just wasn't a star boy power. Especially, I think Colin was a really quiet guy. At least I don't really have a strong memory of him. I think the opposite of that would be Johnny Manziel, or even if they had the same numbers, you hear about Johnny Manziel, all the talk and the girls and everything at A&M.
Yeah.
He was the man, and he knew it, and he boasted about it too. And he's a former Memphis Express player. So
oh gosh,
led them much. So I wanted to talk a little bit about A&M and Manziel and kind of the challenges, because they went in, because as I've mentioned, I think 3 times now, being the only freshman, that's typically what only people think of. There was a lot going on for A&M heading into that season, even during the season. That was their first year in the SEC, going in 2012 with conference expansion that added Missouri and Texas A&M. A lot of people didn't have high expectations, especially entering the West, where they have a brutal conference play of LSU, Alabama, all these high caliber teams that had won national championships, for the past few years. They had the 5th hardest SEC strength of schedule, which was pretty high for someone that you're just throwing into and have no idea where you're going. Also, I did not realize this. It was Kevin Sumlin's first year at A&M. So anytime you have a new head coach, it's already a challenge, much less a new conference that you had in. Their starting running back, who was thought to go into the NFL after the 2012 season, tore his ACL in November the last year. So they, didn't know if he was going to make it back. And you don't have that hope of him coming back, at least wanting to sit out for his future NFL career. And then finally, once they started the season, they lost their home/season/SEC opener to Florida on College game day. down there at Kyle Field. So it didn't start out well for the season, obviously ended okay. The only advantages I really saw for that team looking back is they had Cliff Kingsbury as their offensive coordinator and Mike Evans as a receiver. The next time you'll see that is the Pro Bowl. Yeah. So that was really like I was reading these things. I was like, man, like they faced a lot to have something that's unlikely to happen already. Manziel wasn't even guaranteed the starting job. There were a couple other non-freshman players that he was third on a lot of predictions for the depth chart going into the season. So that was interesting to me that not only Manziel faced his own challenges, the whole team really, it's a miracle they had the season they did that year.
So I think a question I have for you, and this sort of like pulls in Manti Te'o, is say Johnny Manziel has those heroics, but say he doesn't beat Bama. Do you think then Manti Te'o wins the Heisman?
It was a one vote difference, right? So I think he has to. That was no bones about it. That was his Heisman moment. That was his game that if you didn't know who he was before, you knew who Johnny Manziel was after that in the world of college football. After that, on the road, against Bama, they were ranked number 1, defending national champions, eventual national champions. So clearly a very good team. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Manti Te'o is a defensive Heisman winner if Johnny Manziel doesn't go in there and have that play where he bobbled the ball on the north end zone. Just no one knew where the ball was. Alabama thought the play was over, and he's wide open down the back of the end zone. In my mind, there's no doubt about Manti Te'o wins it just because of the phenomenal season he had.
I think it's funny because I think part of it, of course, definitely was the glamour of Notre Dame having a finalist there, and I think he's the last finalist to this day. But you look at his primetime games that he had. Notre Dame was pretty much on network TV every single week. But the primetime games against a subpar Miami team, 10 tackles. Oklahoma, that's the one I remember is being Notre Dame's return. The Oklahoma game on Saturday Night Football in Norman. He had 11 tackles, 2 for a loss, and a pick. And a pass breakup. So really good game there. As well as the Michigan game also in prime time early in the season against Denard Robinson coming off his amazing year. He had 2 picks. Right. And then you have the last primetime game the last 2 he had. It's kind of shut down against Boston College, 2-10 Boston College, granted, 5 tackles, 1 pass breakup. And against Notre Dame, he had a pick. USC had a pick. Against Max Whittick, future Hawaii legend. Just kidding, benched mid-year in 2015, I think.
Right.
Had 5 tackles. So, nothing really impressive. I think the Notre Dame being back contributed a lot to Manti Te'o's candidacy. And I think, to be honest with you, if we look back, the offense for Notre Dame 2012 led by Everett Golson, who's more of a game manager, to be quite honest with you. He'd have spurts. I think if he had a way bigger year, I honestly think you put him in the position, he could probably be Johnny Manziel if he had put up better stats and that team wasn't carried by his defense. Because it's Notre Dame. It's the quarterback of a Notre Dame team bound for the national title game, So that's one reflection I have looking back at that.
Right. I think Manti Te'o, his consistency, he had 2 missed tackles the entire season. So
really?
He's an extremely consistent player and 100+ tackles. This is a question that just has to do with Notre Dame. I'm curious if you knew this because I learned this today in preparing for this podcast. When was the last, we'll just say New Year's Six Bowl? I know it hasn't, New Year's Six is a fairly new term, but when was the last New Year's Six Bowl that Notre Dame won?
Wasn't it I know it was before the BCS. Wasn't it the 96 Orange Bowl, right?
92 Cotton. 92 Cotton Bowl.
Against Texas A&M, right?
I probably, you would know better than me. I just saw that stat today, and I was like, man, it's been a long time since Notre Dame has been a truly competitive team. It just was interesting to me of how, because we were always quick to hype them up, but it's just there's no real meat in it. They go to the playoff, they go to the national championship, but it seems like they always get blown out. It's just interesting to me.
I think,
undeniably, they contributed and changed the landscape of college football, but it's just not in modern history, at least.
Yeah, like on that point, I'm kind of surprised that Ian Book wasn't a finalist in 2018. Like, I'm really surprised by that. Like,
Yeah,
because
no,
that
I
was
can.
a thin year candidate wise. But I guess that's like for another podcast. But I mean, I just want to know, like, I guess like
Right,
thoughts
right.
on that really.
We'll have to cover 2018 soon.
Yeah, for
Break
sure.
that out.
For
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, definitely.
But I think so. Another thing. So we now have like a couple. I have a couple what ifs. Like looking back at the Heisman voting that year. Um, let's see. So we got 2012. Marquise Lee, and I always remembered like Marquise Lee and Robert Woods being great receivers back in the early 2010s for USC, and like those like dark years when they're coming off when they were just coming off their bowl ban and everything. So like people forget about them. They don't remember them as much as like guys like Steve Smith and Dwayne Jarrett, Mike Williams.
Right.
In the mid 2000s. But looking back, like Marquise Lee had like a year for the ages out west with the Trojans because he had 1,721 receiving yards, 856 kick return yards, and a touchdown. So he had over 2,600 yards. If I'm not doing my math right. 2,556 yards. Try to do some quick maths, and then I looked at the numbers and it was wrong. Oh, actually, no, he did over 2,600. He's had 106 rushing yards as well on 13 carries. Year for the ages. Had some really big games. First game against Hawaii. Really bad Hawaii team though. 10 catches, 197 yards. Against Utah, 192 yards. Utah wasn't that good in 2012, and they weren't that good in 2011, coming off a Sun Bowl berth against Georgia Tech. The biggest of big games, he went on a massive 3-game stretch late in the year. Late October, early November. Starting off with the game against Arizona, we had 345 receiving yards and 16 catches and 123 kick return yards. So, like, I mean, that's 477, all-purpose yards. But, like, the games were there. But do you think if I think USC was a preseason number 1, 2 in the AP coming into that year.
Right.
So do you think that if USC runs the table that we get the rare receiver winning the Heisman in Marquise Lee?
Honestly, I don't think that.
Really?
I think that there are only 2 receivers to ever win the Heisman, right? And this is a podcast I can't wait to do with you of talking about how Heisman voting really needs to be changed because it's basically a popularity contest now. It's not really like who truly is the best player in college football. My first example that I'm using from now on is how good Chase Young was, a generational talent. Wasn't even considered compared to Joe Burrow. So I think that, that's a different podcast for a different time. But I just think because it's a popularity contest, I don't think a receiver is going to win at any time until we have reform for Heisman voting. He, like you said, he had a year for the ages. He won the Bill Nickoff Award, if I'm saying that right, that year. And 2 years later, he was a second-round pick in the NFL draft. So he clearly was recognized for how good he was. But I think the ceiling for a Heisman-winning wide receiver, I just don't think it's there anymore. And hasn't been.
I agree. Totally. But I think the formula was there for, a receiver to win it for him. Because if you look at Desmond Howard, return kicks, did tons of other things for Michigan. Well, not tons, but did other things for Michigan other than just, the end and catch passes. Tim Brown did other things for Notre Dame. I was watching an old Notre Dame Navy game from the 80s, and this was in his freshman year or sophomore year, I believe. They put him at tailback in the wishbone. So Tim Brown was doing a whole bunch of things for back in the day. It was really fascinating to see. But I think I have to disagree with you on this one, man. Because it's USC. If a receiver is going to have a great year and be considered for the Heisman, I really think they got to be part of a brand team, a team that's a huge brand. And USC was that team. I mean, especially with that 345 receiving yard game. Granted, they lost the game against Arizona, but I think if they win that game and USC actually puts together a good year,
right?
I think he's hoisting a Heisman. I don't care what kind of year Johnny Manziel has. You have the ingredients of USC being a national contender, USC being a huge brand, and then Marquise Lee having a once in a generation season. Here are these numbers in this 3-game stretch receiving wise. So he had in those 3 games, he had 38 catches for 663 yards and 5 touchdowns, as well as 374 kick return yards, and 67 rushing yards. So he had over 200 yards per game receiving against Arizona, Oregon. That game ended 62-51, really high scoring game. And then Arizona State, and USC's record is 1-2. I think that speaks volumes about that year they had. I think Lane Kiffin was the coach that year.
Right. I think you're right. Yeah. No, I kind of looked at wide receiver Heisman voting history a little bit, and Marquise Lee was in the top 10 for that. The year before, there was no one in the top 10 for Heisman voting, and then the year before that, Justin Blackmon got like 5 votes or something like that. I can't find it on my notes here. It had been a very long time since a wide receiver had even double-digit, Heisman votes. So I thought it was interesting that it just doesn't seem to be there for me. I'm not saying he wouldn't be deserving. I just don't know that he would be able to win it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if you look at the magnitude of it, I think he was 4th in 2012 on a 6-6 USC team, a 6-6 team. Right. Any player in any position coming in 4th on a 6-6 team, like that's an achievement in itself. And I think
that's a very valid point. Yeah.
So honestly, like just based off that alone, I'm inclined to believe that he would have won it. Honestly, just based on like those monster games he had in that stretch, like even if especially if they beat Oregon, like forget them being like great in general. They upset Oregon, a national contender Oregon team at that time. And this was before they lost to Arizona to, kick them out of the national title race. Like I really think that that he wins a Heisman if USC finds a way to win that one, for sure. Another what if I had. So 2012, also notorious for many people, including myself, as like a sad final year of the WAC. So the WAC had been poached in previous years, starting with Boise State, and Boise State marked the exodus because Boise State became too big for that pond, and it was really obvious. Stayed for like a couple games and a couple teams, whether it be Fresno State, Nevada. They just didn't belong in the WAC anymore. They made the obvious move to play in the Mountain West. So they moved to the Mountain West. They channeled this exodus, and in 2012, we only have 7 teams in the WAC, final season of football, including 2 teams brought up from FCS, UTSA, and Texas State, both brought up from FCS. So you have the 7-team conference, but ended up being a really great year for the conference because you have Louisiana Tech getting BCS votes, and I'll talk about them in a second. Louisiana Tech getting BCS votes and getting into the rankings for much of the year. And then you have Utah State beating Louisiana Tech, taking over their place in the rankings. And at the end, my dad's favorite school, San Jose State, getting their first AP rankings in 75 and just ending up in the BCS rankings in general. You have like the weird scenario of a ranked WAC team playing in the Military Bowl at like good old RFK Stadium, something we'll never see again. It's something I don't think anyone would have foreseen. So a couple quarterbacks, of course, are in that sort of range. And I'll start with a guy, Chucky Keaton. I'll start with the champs of that league. Chucky Keaton that year. Very versatile, dual-threat quarterback for the Utah State Aggies. He ended up the year with 3,300 passing yards and over 600 rushing yards. But what strikes me the most and is really heartbreaking, I did a piece for Forgotten 5 on this 2012 Utah State team in retrospect, is they beat Utah for the first time since the 90s. But Wisconsin, the eventual Big Ten champs, they lost by 2 points, missed a field goal, a chip shot field goal at the end on a Friday night. That's one loss. Their next loss, 6-3 to BYU, to a really just all right BYU team, not great at all. So they could have easily been 12-0, like even like 11-1 with a win over Wisconsin. Right. So you think with like these dual threat stats of Chucky Keaton, who really had a sad career afterwards. He was getting Heisman hype the next year, tears his ACL in the summer. 2014, he plays a bunch, but late in the year during the championship race against Boise State, he also injures himself and is out for the rest of the year. And in 2015, he loses his job and he just is never the same. But do you think that Chucky Keaton, even if they only beat Wisconsin out of the 2 losses, do you think based on that he gets Heisman recognition, not even wins, but just like becomes a finalist? So
he became a finalist in 2013, right?
No, he had summer hype. He had a campaign dedicated to him. He hurt himself in the summer. So he was never the same. After 2012, was really never the same.
Okay, I got you now. So he was 8 yards short of 4K yards of total offense. in 2012. So undeniably he had a phenomenal year. I'm going to go back to the point I made for Colin in that it was kind of a weak point for Colin. I think it's a strong point here of who is watching the whack. Like as far as media members, ones that like make money off of television views and writing about it in newspapers, online, whatever. Like this was before ESPN Plus. Like no one's really like, I'm going to watch the whack tonight. So I just don't think like the recognition is there from an overall greatness perspective. I was speaking from a Heisman perspective as far as winning it. From a greatness perspective and appreciation for like greatness in college football, that's a phenomenal year. Like that's how guys that come from middle and nowhere schools have great success in the NFL. They get discovered because he broke a ton of records, like for passing yards, total offensive yards, completion percentage, completions. Broke his own completion percentage record. Like he had tons of records. I don't care what school you're at, That's how Jerry Rice got discovered at Mississippi Valley State. Like that's how you get discovered, is breaking all of these records. And I think he did. I think he ended up being a UDFA signing after the next year. But that is like, I think he contributed a lot to the whack and which, didn't really exist after that. And I guess for the first year of their existence in the Mountain West, but I don't think he could have won the Heisman no matter what kind of numbers he put up, just because it's just not there for the small schools anymore. But I do think, like, from an appreciation perspective, man, he had a hell of a season. Like, it was impressive. Like, looking back at 4K yards, whether you're high school, backyard football, whatever it is, like, putting up that kind of yardage is insane. I don't care what your competition is.
So I pose you this a little bit more background on Chucky Keaton. I don't know if you remember, this is, your domain, SEC football. 2011, defending champs Auburn takes them an onside kick to come from behind and beat Utah State. Chucky Keaton's a freshman quarterback of that squad. So he already has national clout.
Right.
I think he can at least become a finalist. I think maybe if you look back, he could have been a finalist if he beat Wisconsin, because they had the nationally televised Thursday night game against Utah, or Friday night game against Utah, or whatever, midweek game against Utah. They won it. Pac-12 school's like, okay, this guy rings the ball. This is Chucky Keaton from last year against Auburn. And then Wisconsin. Who's the running back in Wisconsin that year? Monte Ball, Heisman finalist the previous year. So you have that star recognition in those games. So I really think that if they beat Wisconsin, Chucky Keaton gets an invite to New York, given how thin that roster was, only 3 finalists. Any year you have 3 finalists. I mean, there's always room for more, I think. So I'm gonna have to sort of, play the what if game even more with that, for sure. So our next quarterback out of the whack, Colby Cameron, Louisiana Tech. I'm not sure if you watched this game live. I didn't. I just remember seeing the score the next morning. But 2012, Texas A&M, Louisiana Tech in Shreveport at good old Independence Stadium, venerable Independence Stadium. You have Louisiana Tech falls behind 34-7 early in the game, ends up losing 59-57, misses a heartbreaking 2-point conversion, and I don't think Tech fans have recovered from that. Oddly enough, I follow a couple of Louisiana Tech Twitter accounts for some reason. They love their team. Their dedication's there. I really admire it coming from the CUSA school. But against that Texas A&M team, Colby Cameron went 44-58, 75% completion percentage on 58 tosses, 450 yards, 5 TDs, no picks, 25 rushing yards, not that big. But in a comeback effort broadcasted in primetime on one of the, I think it's ESPNU, do you think if Louisiana Tech, barring that they, broke down later in the year and lost their last 2 games against Utah State and San Jose State, do you think Colby Cameron gets some Heisman love if he beats A&M? And granted, too, against Johnny Manziel, do you think that then kicks Johnny Manziel out of the Heisman race?
I don't think it kicks Johnny Manziel out of the Heisman race. I think that he does get some Heisman love, like you said. I don't think he's winning it, or maybe not even a finalist, but at least I think he's on that list at least. What place did he come in a place? Was he voted on at all?
All the WAC quarterbacks I'm bringing up for this year were they weren't
voted on. Okay,
no votes.
Gotcha.
Cameron's stats for the year, and this is like that unique Louisiana Tech offense that had the center calling out plays or something like that under Sonny Dykes. But Cameron had 4,147 yards and 31 touchdowns and 5 picks and 4 rushing touchdowns on 177 yards. So a bit of a dual threat, but more of like a, pocket passer, let it fly.
Right. Right. I would definitely put Keeton above him. And then, yeah, like maybe he's talked about a little bit if they end up winning that. There's every year there's games between those smaller group of 5 schools that it's like you have to play what if. Like I think a big one for this past year was Tulsa and Memphis. College game day never goes to SMU and Memphis if Tulsa ends up making that field goal.
Right.
So I think there's always games like that, but I think eventually it doesn't amount to much in my mind. I could be wrong. I want to be wrong. I love seeing like the small guy like get all this stuff, but I just maybe he's talked about, but I don't think he ends up winning it or anything like that.
Yeah. So granted, like Louisiana Tech did lose their last 2 to Utah State. So I think you're right. I do agree with that Keeton would be above Cameron in that Heisman discussion if he wins that game, even if he wins that game because of the head-to-head. But I think, honestly, the stats don't lie. Like 4,100 yard passing yards and just how many points that team was scoring. I know Kent Dixon I think he had over 20 touchdowns. I'll have to verify this later. Had over 20 touchdowns as a freshman that year. And just that offense is just something else. It was going back to the days when you had Ty Detmer, Jim McMahon, all those guys slinging it for BYU in the WAC. So yeah, no, for sure. There's no denying it there. Like I said, if you're putting up those kinds of numbers, I don't care who your competition is or anything like that. That's impressive. That's better than Jeff Driscoll did when he was there. God, yeah. No, they had that transfer pipeline. I mean, it was pretty crazy because they had, I think it was 3 straight transfers. It was Driscoll. They had Cody Sokol, I think, out of Iowa, and I think there was another one too, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it's just those 2 guys, but yeah, they had that pipeline for a little bit, and just really, really good offense out there. So our last QB is David Fales out of San Jose State, current Jets QB. I cannot believe David Fales is somehow still in the league and he's barely throwing any passes in his career. I think that's insane, but more power to him. I like David Fales a lot because my dad, being born in Monterey, huge San Jose State fan. But David Fales ends the year with 4,193 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 9 picks for a San Jose State team. Don't even bother looking at the rushing stats. Total pocket passer, including negative 98 rushing yards against Utah State. But 4,100 yards on a San Jose State team gets ranked for the first time since '75. Goes 11-2, wins against a solid Bowling Green team in the Rose Bowl of the East at the Military Bowl, and then just an overall signature year for the Spartans. But early in the year, it seems like every one of these WAC schools had a what if, and that's kind of the crazy thing that I wrote about for Forgotten Five. So against Stanford, they lose a 1-score game, and this is a Stanford team without Andrew Luck. Granted, they lose 20-17, but this Stanford team still wins a Rose Bowl with Kevin Hogan at the helm. And against Stanford, he has 217 passing yards. Not a great game, but they were in the thick of it early season. Do you think if San Jose State wins that game, goes 11-1, do you think that he somehow creeps into the race? And I'll give something that Colby Cameron and Chucky Keaton didn't have. A vast television market. Granted, San Jose's got a small share of the Bay Area market, but it's still the Bay Area market. I'm sure that their share in it is bigger than what Utah State has and what Louisiana Tech has out in near Shreveport.
No, for sure. That's very interesting about how some of the biggest cities have very little to no college football. I don't know if you remember that college game day in Times Square. It's you have Syracuse and Army. Not a great selection to choose from for one of the most populated areas in the world. It's always been interesting to me. So going back to that, I don't think it's as simple as if they win, if he gets that kind of recognition. I think it's if they win because of him, right? You said they had 217 passing yards. If he had put up 400 yards and 5 touchdowns and 0 to 1 interceptions, I think, maybe he gets that kind of recognition. But they were in the thick of it. They didn't win, but kept it. You said they kept it a 1-score game against that Rose Bowl Stanford team.
Yeah, 20-17.
Yeah. I think if they it sounds like the defense did a hell of a job against that team.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't see them if they win because of him and they end up winning like 35-33 or something like that. Maybe, yeah, I can kind of see that. I don't see it. It sounds like I'm just walking away thinking like, man, how great was that Spartan defense against an elite like Pac-10 offense back then. But yeah, and if they win because of him, yeah, totally. But I don't think if they end up winning like 21-20 because of some great defensive play, I don't see it personally.
I think something I forgot to mention too is that game was broadcast on the Pac-12 network too, so little exposure to as well. Especially since San Jose State went, I think 5-7. They went 5-7 the year before, so that like I don't think anyone was expecting this game to be like a great like non-conference game for both. Right. Especially since San Jose State has not won the Bill Walsh Legacy game, as the rivalry's called, since Bill Walsh, an alumni of San Jose State and coached twice at Stanford. They hadn't won the Bill Walsh Legacy game since 2006 when they had their great New Mexico Bowl champion team. One of the first things I can like truly remember rooting for, because my dad, he pulled me into the basement in the man cave and we watched that New Mexico Bowl. Little did I know I'd be living in New Mexico like years after that. Really weird how it worked out.
Right.
But yeah, like they hadn't won the Bill Walsh Legacy game since 2006, so there wasn't much expectations there, and the exposure just wasn't there for that game. And granted, it still isn't there for any game that's broadcast on the Pac-12 network. Like, to be honest. So I think that kind of stops in like that exposure. Right.
I'm curious. I've never heard the term Bill Walsh Legacy game. Do we call like Kent State Bama the Nick Saban Legacy game? Like, is this like an official term that I'm missing out on, or is it just kind of like coined in smaller Spartan circles?
It's coined like so. Honestly, there's like a lot of named rivalries that like there's like a couple legacy games in the Mountain West. I know the Hawaii San Jose State game got renamed the they'll make it official. I'll say that. Like, okay, all right. I didn't know if there was like some like neutral site like a logo that I like had never seen on Google Images. No, I don't think there's a logo. Okay, cool. But gotcha. The San Jose State Hawaii game was the Dick Tomey legacy game after Dick Tomey passed away, the well-traveled great coach. So no, it's not. It's okay. Not things like willy-nilly after coaches who coach multiple spots for sure. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. I like that though. I like that. That's great. Yeah. So I think we've exhausted all of our possible what-if options and scenarios for the 2012 Heisman Race. Do you have anything else to say, Jackson? I think I'm good. I think we should tweet this at Chucky Keaton and say this is probably the first time he's been talked about in years on any sort of podcast. Who knows? So that's awesome. I think you brought up some great what-ifs, and it was a race. It was a historic race, no matter how you looked at it, for sure. For sure. Yeah, totally agree. So I guess with that, we'll see you until next time with more information to be disclosed on our next race or what we'll be talking on the next podcast episode. So until next time, I'm Omar Rashawn Borja. And I'm Jackson Danner. And we have college football next week. Oh, yes. Central Arkansas and Austin, PA. I've never been more excited for that game in my life. I forgot about the FCS kickoff, to be honest, but we'll see. It might be the only game we see all year. But who knows? We'll see. This is exciting. So until next time, we'll see you later, and take care of yourselves, everyone, and bye.